The Rubricker here, welcome back. Okay, so we've got this all built from last time. Before we start the build today, we went over building the load shifter and we've set up the timing for the other 5 components. Let's set up the timing for the load shifter. Right now, it's actually set up correctly, so I'm going to throw it off a bit. Let's just advance this a little ways to some random point, likely where you've got it set up as well. You notice in the previous instructions how to connect the load shifter to the main drive assembly. So what we're going to do now is we're going to run the main load everything with the test gear. So we'll put the test gear in, we'll put the pins in our motor, and let's get this all hooked up. Now, we put in the test gear, we got to disconnect the lock, because we got to run it in the reverse direction, then full speed. So let's see how we're looking. Running slowly, we can see Bob still lines up nicely, drops off the bucket, leaves, picks up and sets down at the right time intervals. Everything's good. This load shifter though is pushing buckets into Bob's grip. Obviously not lined up. So what we do is we get Bob exactly to where he's ready to pick up a bucket. So right there, he wants a bucket to be pushed in. So we're going to disconnect this assembly and we'll pop the motor off so that we can turn this freely. So this direction turns this guy clockwise, so like that, which means this goes in the same direction, pulls in, and right before it starts to shift, so right there we can see a little bit of movement. That's where we want to lock it back in. So right there, we'll lock the axle back in. We'll reconnect our test gear. And let's see how it works. A little bit of a delay. It should be a little bit tighter in its timing. It should be right there that it's already moving. So, we can disengage that gear. We'll disengage this, and we'll advance it 1, 2, so essentially 1/2 rotation. We'll lock that back in, and let's have a look. There we go. So that shifts over just before Bob starts to pick up. Shifts, lifts, and drops. Okay, so that's the timing that we need for the load shifter. At this point, we're going to go to still frames. We're going to build a whole lot of basic structure. We're going to get the 2 conveyor systems put in this video, so follow along with the build. Something I learned from last time, and I'm going to keep it down below. Well, let's try this again. There we go. Down below in the description, I'm going to put a link to the Rebrickable website for the parts list. No human can read everything as it goes by. No one wants to copy it down. So the best place for parts lists is rebrickable.com. You can download them in XML format. You can upload them into Bricklink if you're looking to buy all the pieces. You can even run it against your inventory to see if you have all the parts to make what we're going to make today. So check out bricklink.com if you're not already there, and let's get started on this build. All right, we just built the part where the balls are going to be coming out at the end of the machine. I don't know if you noticed as this was going together, this part here is actually off by a half stud, and that's using the hollow studs of the Technic bricks and the tubes here, and it just lines up. So just something to keep in mind. And then we're putting this on. It's right to the edge of the board, and it's actually 4 studs of space between this frame here. So across, we'll just mount that right there. And I did that wrong because that can't be there. So perfect. This is in place. We're going to do a little more structure on here and above the load shifter. So I'll make sure we get good angles on the shots, and we're going to do more still frame building, and then we'll come back and make sure we get all the key parts lined up. I've removed the load wheel because we're going to start putting in some of the extra gearing. So we've got our 40 tooth gear, and this. So this axle comes through in the last hole here, and our gear goes on. We're going to put it in any old direction for now because we're going to be setting up the timing in a little bit. And while we have this actually here and in place, we're going to add a little bit more to this. So just so that you can see what's going on here, we have a 4 axle, 4 studs long. We're going to push it this half bushing partway on. We have a 7 stud beam, and then we're just going to put a bushing on the other side and just make sure it's loose enough that it can swivel. Coming off of this last hole here, you can see this is what's going to be pushing against this. We'll let it fall, that's fine. And on the other side, we're putting in a 1x4 Technic brick, just like that. So if you look at it, it just sits in here like so. And also, while we're shooting some video, we've got one other part here, and so let's just build this in video. Oh, what do we need here? 1, 2, perfect. So this guy, put in a 1x4 brick. Do I have that right? Yes, I do. So it's just back one from this one. It's a 1x4, so we're putting a 1x4 brick, a 1x4 brick, a 1x4 brick, a 1x4 plate, because this gets us to exactly the right height we need, and then another 1x4 Technic brick right in place. What's our angle on that so you can see it? There we go. So coming off of this now, well, let's put a 1x4 tile on top, make it look nice and smooth. Now that we've got that in place, I can actually pull it out of place, and it's going to be a frictionless axle pin. And we're going to take a 3 stud axle, and we're going to put it in place here. And 2 of these 3 stud levers, 2 of them, and just put them onto the other side here. Actually, before we do that, we need to actually put something in there. So we're going to put number 1 axle connector in here. Make sure that axle doesn't stick out on the other side. We're going to put our 2 levers. Make sure that that's nice and loose. And then we're going to bring in this that we just built with our pin, stick it through the axle hole at the other end of these two levers, and then press it into place. Now you will notice there's a 1 stud gap here. That's totally fine. Our lever arm is going to come off of here. And that's about it for the tie-in to the drive assembly at this point. So we're going to go back to still images and we're going to keep building. Okay, so we just built this part, and this is how it's going to mount in place. We take a frictionless pin, stick that in, stick it into the second hole down, make sure that it's sitting upright, and this 4 stud axle will slide into this beam here. So let's just disengage the gear here and we can show you how this is going to work. This is what's going to be lifting the buckets. So as this wheel goes round, this arm is down, and as the wheel goes round it lifts and then drops. Okay? Pretty straightforward. Alright, so we got this part built. We're going to get this mounted into place. It's also a bit of a tricky one because there's a few points that it mounts. So we've got our 2 black pins. We're going to mount it in the front 2 holes of this assembly here, just like that. and our axle hanging down underneath, so you can start to see how that's going to work. We've got our connector right here, so I'll just spin that up. So we got this connector right here, and this axle mounts right into it. So just holding it up from underneath. There we go. Now that's in place. As we move the machine, you can see how it goes back and forth. You can also see how these axles get pushed up and down. We're going to do a little more building on that so that we can actually mount the bucket unloader and get the conveyor system going. So hang tight, here we go with more pictures. Okay, sorry guys, I have to interject this because I made a small mistake. This piece here that I showed it going in, it's a 1x4 brick. It actually goes on this side right here. Sorry about that. So here we go with another fun part of this build. We've got our conveyor belt. This one here is 42 links long. So if you didn't catch it before, I had them split into sections of 10 with 2 left over. So this is 42 links. And I figured I'd get this on video just to show. It's not easy putting this on, but there are ways of doing it. So get both of our ends together. And lock it in place. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to take 2 universal joints, that's these bendy guys, and we're going to put them together on there, and part of this axle that sticks out on there, and this part of the main drive assembly, we'll put it on here. Alright, make sure everything's looking lined up. Okay, we're looking good. That's in place. I'm going to actually attach the motor. There's something really interesting I want you to see here, and it only really shows up when you run it at full speed. So I'm going to attach the motor in production mode, I guess you can call it, and make sure I run it in the correct direction. Ah, perfect. I did it wrong, which is good. I want you to see this. I don't know if the film catches it, but the conveyor belt is actually running sporadically. It's going fast, slow, fast, slow, fast, slow. And I actually had someone contact me asking me, why is that happening? Why does the conveyor belt seem so jerky? And it took me a while to figure it out myself. The way these universal joints work is if you have both of them essentially mounted in the same position, you'll get that response. It'll be fast, slow. So the way to get past that is give it a 1/4 turn, just so that they're mounted offset, and we'll reattach that. So it's just a 1/4 turn on the axle that they're connected on. I'll reattach here, and let's run it again. Now it's nice and smooth, no issues. So this is why we gotta have video. Occasionally I run into some stuff like that. There's just no other way to explain it than to show it. So there you go. And let's get back into building. Okay, so once again we're going to mount some chain. This time we've got 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 77 chain links. So that's 77 chain links. That's for the long, or not chain links, but tread links to make the long conveyor belt. So we'll put together our 77 links in a line, and then we need to have some fun stringing it through. So it goes in on this side. I'll just help it through here and underneath. Okay, let's go with something easier here. Just pull it apart. It's Lego. Lock that together. We got ourselves a conveyor system, and we'll mount it back in place. There we go. Nice and smooth. This one's running, but obviously connected in. And we'll get back to still frames now as we build the rest of the structure for this. Just about done for today. All right, so we've just put this piece in. Something to keep in mind. You can hear the conveyor hitting. Now, this is so precisely built, as you can see right in here, not all the way down. We press that down. There we go, nice and smooth. So you gotta make sure everything is well put together. The smallest things can cause problems because the clearance on that is so tight. All right, back to the build. So we're gonna hook up the other drive. We've got a 32 stud axle, 2 axle extensions, a 3 stud axle, and a 12 tooth thick conical gear. So we're gonna take our 3 stud axle and our gear, and we're going to get it mounted right in here. Let's see if we get a good view on that. So right in here, got that mounted. We're going to add an axle extension. And then on this end, down here, we'll add the other axle extension. And we're going to add our 32 stud axle. Now, when you put this together, you'll probably realize this axle is probably about half a stud short. So you got to center this as best you can. We don't really have any leeway to have that 3 stud axle on either end sticking out to the center towards the axle, so we've got to have everything kind of pushed more this way. It is doable. It could be better if there was like a 32.5 stud axle. That doesn't exist though. But we've got this in place. We have our battery box. Let's give it a try. So we can... Now, I was curious as to what the point of this was. What happens without it, sometimes, is you can get a bucket and it'll just stick right here. It won't transition over. This just makes sure that 100% of the time, every time, this is going to work. And you want it to be fairly close to the top of the bucket. The reason why is as it goes down, this keeps it from dropping into the groove and getting stuck, and makes sure that it makes it all the way onto the next conveyor system. So you end up with a nice smooth transition as your buckets move around. All right, let's finish up the unloader of the buckets and we'll get this going. All right, so now we're going to mount this into place. This is the mechanism that lifts the buckets off of the load wheel. So we've got this 8-stud axle with a stopper, which we're going to feed through, just like that. And also what we're looking for, you want to make sure it's well built, that it slides very smoothly. If it doesn't slide smoothly, it's going to bind up and it'll cause you a world of frustration. Now this axle feeds into the connector here, the connector pin. And let's mount this here. Not 100% sure I've got it at the right spot, and the way we're going to find out is I'm actually going to run it. Well, we know that the timing's not quite right, but it actually sits, it's a bit forward. So when this comes all the way back, we want to make sure that at the all the way back position, it sits center in this tile here. So what we're going to end up doing is we're going to have to move this back 1 stud. So pop that off, back 1 stud, make sure it's locked into place, and now you'll see it sits more in the middle of this tile. We want to make sure that when it's unloading the buckets, it gets them all the way on. Now, we're going to be doing a little bit of timing, and since this is pretty much the last piece of the build today, let's just do this as video. What we're looking for is that this component travels back to the load wheel, then lifts, then moves forward, and then sets down. So right now, if we have a look, we're close, but not quite. One thing I will say though, and you may or may not notice this, let's run this a little slower, just so that you can see what's going on. At this point in building the machine, timing is crucial, so let's keep up with setting up our timing as we go, so that it's not a big ordeal once it's all done. So we're going to run it in the test direction. Now, what's good that's happening is because we've got it set up so that the main load wheel rotates when Bob moves away, we also want everything that's going to be happening on the load wheel to happen all at the same time. So whether we're returning a bucket, picking up a bucket, or filling a bucket, they all have to happen at the same time. So if you have a look, everybody leaves the center, everybody comes into the center at the same time, relatively. So the only thing we need to align then in what's going on here is when this part raises and lowers. So right now is when it should actually start rising. So I'm going to put it right there because that's when it just arrives at the load wheel. So it should arrive at the load wheel. Let's lock this gear back into place. And then it should pick up, move back, and set down. It's picking up and setting down a little bit late. So it should be a little bit sooner. So we'll move this gear forward just a touch. And by a touch, I mean like 3 teeth. The adjustments you're doing on this to get everything working right are minute. So it picks up, travels back, sets down. You may notice it's a little bit skippy, a little jittery. A lot of that has to do with making sure everything is tight, everything is straight. But let's move everything away from the center here. There we go. And let's just pull in the extra pieces that I popped off for ease of assembly. So we've got our load shifter frame, which fits right over there. We've got our main load wheel, which we can sit right in here. And let's just make sure in test mode everything is straight, lined up, everything moves at all the right times. I'm pretty happy with that. Now, this is how you find out if it's really working. Let's put some buckets on. Keep this centered, running in test mode. A little bit wobbly picking up the buckets. If we widen this grip out just a little bit, the buckets will sit lower. So let's see if we can actually clear. Yeah. And we set her down. Yeah, you can already see it dumping buckets off the end there. So our timing that we've configured so far is actually really good. So I'll move these out of the way. You don't want stuff that falls to jam up the mechanisms and cause problems. So very quickly, just before we wrap up, I'm going to put this in full speed mode just to show you where we are right now with this project. And then next time we're going to set up the dumper and the platform that the buckets slide on. So then this whole section is going to be finished. Then, at least for the most part, it's going to be a pretty clever product to look at, but still not running in the full function that we were hoping for. So because we're running it in full speed, we'll put the lock back on the battery box and let's run it in full speed and see how we're looking. Running pretty good, except for obviously what we're missing. So thanks again for watching. When we come back at this, if you're subscribed, you'll be notified right away and you will see the next part. I applaud all of you who are keeping up with this and look forward to hearing your comments and getting your feedback. Thank you everyone who has been emailing me directly. The comments are a good way to leave information. And I'll have the part count up on Rebrickable as soon as it gets approved, and I'll include the link down below in the description. So subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Oh man, I forgot a piece. Okay, we have our test gear, that's fine. This little guy though, I was debating when to put it in. Nice thing about Lego, you can always work it in later. Sorry for the shaky camera work as I'm trying to hold the camera while wedging the, okay. The piece goes in there. Hang on one sec. With the magic of camera work, I'm going to pop it in there. Ta-da! So this is just a little extra support. The balls can go through here. You may notice that this isn't sloped. Totally okay. Other balls coming down the ramp will push them out if any get stuck, but I have yet to have that happen. Make sure you set this up on a flat platform. And if you're caught up to here, we're ready to go for the next part. See you soon.